Welcome. Thanks for joining. Really appreciate you're all here for your lunch break. We're going to give people a minute to get on. You're at Grand Rounds today, approaching different communication styles with our wonderful presenter, Wes Avants. While you're waiting, you can sign in for the CME, if you're here for CME. Let's go to the next slide. We'll go ahead and start some housekeeping. So we are recording this session and it should be uploaded within the next few days. If you have to leave early or you want to see it again, so it will be on our website, and Tanya is putting our website into the chat room and it's right there on the screen for you. We will have questions and comments at the end of the presentation. So please don't be shy, unmute and ask your questions or type them into the chat room and we'll read them all for you. Please be sure to sign in for attendance if you are here for CME or other continuing education credits through the EDS text message, which I'll show you on the next slide. But kindly please complete that evaluation survey as well as the PHRF's evaluation survey that we will be sending at the end of the program today. Those surveys really help us, and the one for CME you have to do to get your CMEs. Next slide. Next slide.
Okay, there we go.
So this week's CME code is 24 BLEB, B-L-E-B. I don't know how they come up with these. They're really strange sometimes. So this code will expire tomorrow at noon. Please text to 828-295-1144 or visit eeds.com to get your credits. Event disclosures. Wes Avants has no relevant financial relationships to report in the last 12 months with a commercial interest, and this activity is not commercially supported. Next slide. I know you're all enjoying this series that we've had with Wes. So we just wanted to make sure you knew about the next one, which is August 11th, structuring difficult conversations for mutually successful outcomes. I can't wait for that. And then 2 weeks after that, we'll be creating safety and trust in conversations. Tanya is putting in the registration right now. So if you wanted to go ahead and register for this while we're starting this program, please do. We hope you will join us. These have been really interesting sessions. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the second of this series about communication, approaching different communication styles. And, you know, we all find ourselves in, you know, uncertain situations sometimes and getting triggered needlessly. And Wes is going to cure us of all this and give us some helpful hints today. Without further ado, I'm going to let Wes take it away. He can introduce himself and tell you about what the objectives are today. Take it away, Wes.
Thank you, Dana. I appreciate that. I'm excited that you're a part of this. This is subject matter that is special to me. Most of my career has been spent helping individuals, particularly leaders, maximize their effectiveness, and much of the time that centers around dealing with conflict in a way that leads not only to satisfying results in terms of outcomes, but also to build some satisfying relationships as a part of that. And, you know, one thing that we all have in common is this challenge when it comes to conflict with other people. That's really part of the reason why I focused on this early in my career, because it was such an incredible challenge for me. And as humans, we all know that our welfare in the present and in the future depends upon what others think about us and how they feel about us. But when we're in conflict with others, our standing in the eyes of others is at risk. And so it's very reasonable that we be thoughtful about how we approach that conflict in order to get the best outcomes possible. But it's also true that as humans, whenever we feel trapped in a situation where there is lots of risk or perceived danger, our fight or flight response is triggered. And we find ourselves with little ability to reason, little ability to have sound judgment. So, to help prevent from going into a fight or flight response, and that's illustrated in this slide, we have the choice. We have the choice to plan ahead. We can think about what are our options when we get in a situation such as this. Unfortunately, this looks like much of our work days. With so many things attacking us, we've got a job to do, our safety, our welfare is always at risk, the welfare of others in the case of physicians as well. And so there's a tremendous challenge that we face amidst all the noise and the things that are going on to actually demonstrate good judgment. And again, knowing ahead of time that I've got options when I find myself in a situation where conflict is beginning to escalate, or maybe it's a different scenario where I'm anticipating a future conversation where I'm expecting there to be lots of emotions and energy, then the ability to know that I've got options and to have those options in mind gives me the ability to be better prepared to calm down and to manage those emotions. So let's look at where that might be appropriate. Most researchers divide disagreement into these 5 levels, and it begins as a problem to solve, but then it can easily escalate into disagreement. And that's a beautiful thing as humans. We need each other's perspectives. It would be a terrible thing if I was making all the decisions in my limited perspectives. So we love disagreement. We flourish on disagreement. And it's okay when it becomes a contest. It's more challenging when it becomes a contest. And the material that we're looking at today really focuses on these levels where there's a disagreement and it may be a contest at this point. I really want to win. You really want to win. And that's where the challenge becomes, because there's the potential for emotions to escalate during that contest and it to become a fight or flight response. What we'll revisit later on is the fact that during a fight or flight response, I no longer really have the ability to reason. At that point, I'm more driven by emotions than reasoning. That can also escalate to what is known as an intractable relationship. And if that happens, then it's no longer about me escaping or me winning. It's about me making sure that you pay a price. I may try to get you out of the organization. I may try to ruin your reputation in the eyes of others. But at that point, there's no issue to solve. I'm just out to get you. So on those higher levels, it's most common that we will need a third party to intervene. But the techniques that we're going to look at today are going to focus on this aspect of how can we approach disagreement and contest in a way that prevents us from allowing those emotions to escalate further. So that's our objective. This revisits what we talked about last time. We went into greater detail, but the focus is how can I stay calm and curious? A sense of compassionate curiosity is the best way to neutralize or turn back down emotions that are unproductive, both in myself and in other individuals. It's really difficult for me to be in a place of curiosity and be compassionate and hang on to anger and other unhelpful emotions of feeling threat. And those lead us to the ability to be clear and confident, and that's where we want to go. So in speaking of these choices, the choices that I have when it comes to approaching conflict are represented on the screen in front of you. Some are very assertive, others are much less assertive, and some are very cooperative, while others are much less cooperative. So just briefly looking at this chart in front of you, in the upper left-hand corner, to be very assertive, which is appropriate, and less cooperative, which sometimes is needed, there's competing. That's where I just try to get my way. On the bottom of that scale, you see the number 2 is avoiding. I'm not very assertive, and I'm not really trying to cooperate. We're just trying to get around this without any damage. In the middle lies compromising. That's the third one, where, okay, I'm trying to be a little bit cooperative and a little bit assertive, but what I'm trying to do when it's cooperative is just find this place where we can agree upon something and go on our way. The upper right-hand corner, there's collaborating. I'm being very assertive and I'm being very cooperative. And we're trying to work through finding a solution that is genuinely satisfying for both of us. And the fifth one is harmonizing. It's not very assertive and it's not very cooperative, but what I am, or it is very cooperative. It's mislabeled there. When I'm harmonizing, I'm willing just to give you what you need in order to go on and make things okay. So in view of these 5 options, these approaches to conflict, I'm going to invite you to put a number in a chat box. That number is a number that reflects which one of these do you find yourself using most easily? Which one is your go-to? Which is, would you say, is your default? The one that just kind of is my nature in general. And you can think about it in the workplace or maybe just, in your personal life, it doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of curious to see what you would put in the chat box as far as this would be my go-to on this. And I'm going to give just a minute for you to make some responses here, which is easiest for you to use. So are we seeing some responses come up in the chat box, Sonia or Tahina?
Not yet.
Okay, great. Well, you may not have a clear choice yet. I'll give you another minute
Oh,
or two.
yes. Number 2, 3s. A couple of 3s, couple of 2s.
Yeah, we have 2,
More 4s.
4. We have a 2 with an unhappy face.
Great.
We have 2 2s, 3 3s, and 3 4s, and a 5.
Great, great, good variety. I love to illustrate the fact that each of us is different. And that really is the point of this. First of all, it's that level of self-awareness. What do I know about me? Because once I've been able to understand what my default is, that's the first step in me being able to choose something differently, either if that's not working or if the situation requires it. And realizing that there is no one good approach, that because there are all these options, if I find myself in a situation where I'm approaching it with one option, with one approach, and someone else is choosing a different approach, then we're not likely to have as productive or satisfying conversation as we would if we're harmonizing our approaches. If one of us is moving toward the other one in a way that will allow us to approach this together. So this is the conversation to have. These are the options. But let's drill down in the next few minutes just for a little bit more explanation, not only about what these 5 approaches involve, but what are the benefits, what are the problems with each one, and then when is each one most appropriate. So thank you for answering on that. And we'll first look at this idea of competing. The benefit is you've got strength to persist toward a solution in the face of all kinds of distractions, as in the first slide with the birds, or even just a lack of disagreement. There's a lot of clutter and different opinions. The challenge is that it's easy to satisfy your own concerns while ignoring the needs or expertise of others. And that yields long-term collateral damage. Nobody really wants to engage closely with someone who always wants to win. And so others will start either adopting an avoiding circumstance in that particular case, or they will ramp up their competition. And then we've got some really heated discussions, and you run some risks there as well. So when is it appropriate? Well, here's some good examples. When a quick decision is required, when the outcome is critical to your situation, compromise is not an option. And when it's important, or you've got unpopular actions that are simply required, you're enforcing rules, you're doing discipline. And in this particular case, it's very possible that competing is your best option. But what about the other options? At the other end of that side is avoiding. I'm going to define avoiding in a strategic fashion. This means you strategically delay addressing the issue to allow more reason to prevail. All parties come with a better attitude, more helpful emotions. And I use the word strategically important because there's a downside where we're not being strategic. We're just sidestepping. We're just trying to avoid at all costs. Nobody gets satisfied in that particular case. And often it is a precursor toward escalation, because a lack of dissatisfaction, given time, I will continue to find reasons why I'm going to be more upset. So avoiding has a downside. When is it appropriate? When things are simply trivial, it's not important. And we all have a measure. There's no distinct, clear measure of when something's important and when it's trivial. A lot of that is personal, but some of it is about the job. And so if I can simply let it go, then I'm saving myself and others time and energy. When we both need or all need time to cool off, there's no opportunity in this moment to constructively address the concerns. That doesn't mean that I'm going to shut you down, but it does mean that we're going to create space. It may be that it's just a few moments. It may be a few hours. It could be weeks. But the situation demands that we come at this with cooler heads. And then finally, the cost confronting outweighs the benefits. We're always making trade-offs every day. And this aspect of conflict, sometimes it's best just, look, I don't really need this. We don't need this. Let's go on. I don't have to have this situation and have my way. The third one is compromising, where it's in this middle ground, where you negotiate opposing views and you're finding what is acceptable to both parties. When there's in organizational life, we often find ourselves needing to compromise, but it's important to realize the downside of that. You can get an acceptable statement, but it may not be very satisfying to all parties. This often happens in meetings. We have a challenging decision to make, we have differing opinions, and we hammer out some type of compromise. And then going forward, we throw up our hands because nobody supports the decision. When we're really wanting people to act, we're wanting people to support the decision, and we look around and nobody's with us, we're there by ourselves. Usually this is a function of compromising. And so there's a real downside there. I don't really support this to begin with. And so why should I actively support this going forward? So let's move on. Compromising. This is appropriate when the welfare of the organization is necessary. We just have to compromise. This is what everybody needs. And it's unrealistic to fully satisfy everyone. If it's just not going to happen, okay, this is a great solution. The other is when parties can agree to disagree and live with the decision. Okay, if I'm not going to insist on continuing to compete here, compromising can work. So let's move on. We still have a couple of other options. One of those is harmonizing. And harmonizing has some tremendous benefits. This is where I'm trying to do my best to satisfy the other person's concerns because I don't want to waste time, I don't want to waste energy, and I want to preserve the relationship. Especially in our personal lives, but if it's someone we work with closely and regularly, we do this all the time without really thinking about it. Or maybe I should say, if we fail to do this regularly, then people are going to start to develop a conception of us as hard-headed. They're going to think they never give in. So the challenge here is, can you satisfy the other person's concerns at your own expense and be okay with that? If it may be an expense to my reputation, if I don't ever stand for anything, then my influence is going to really suffer in the long term. For those of us, and harmonizing is my nature. I learned painfully the hard way early on that I could easily be just disregarded and ignored. Even if I'm actively engaging in a conversation, people are listening to me, but they're not paying attention really, because they know in the end I'm going to harmonize. The other thing is what it does to my self-concept. If I continually give myself examples of where I gave away any of my self-interest, then my self-respect easily drains away. And I see myself as much less than, really not worthy of being at the table, as it were, in this conversation. So while harmonizing has some tremendous upsides, it certainly has the downside. But when is it most appropriate? Again, the relationship is much more important than getting my way. Supporting the other party is desirable and the costs are not great. And here's an interesting one: to restore equilibrium during a tense moment or after a disagreement. Let's imagine that we've been negotiating a really tough conversation and we've come to a place where we have agreement and we have support by both parties. At that point, especially if you are perceived as coming out the winner or the other person really wanted to win. They will likely be feeling the need to have some sense that they won or that they are able to preserve their power or their dignity. And so they may come back and make another request. It may not be a big one, but it may be asking you to compromise just a little bit on the agreement that was made. Like, okay, I can do this, but I want to wait a month before I do this, or I'm going to need some extra resources, or I'm going to need some, I don't know what it would be. At that particular point, it can be really helpful in your relationship with them to allow a small amount of just harmonizing. Okay, sure, I can go with that. It's not your plan, but it's good enough for me to let you have that. That goes a long way in terms of allowing them to save face and show up in the next time fully engaged and ready to engage with you. So the last one, collaborating. If we look at what the benefits of collaborating are, it's tremendous. The upside here may be the best of all. You're working to find a win-win solution that completely satisfies all parties. The challenge is it's rarely an easy option. You can work to find a win-win solution, but to make that happen takes a great deal of time in most cases. The more important it is, the more time it takes. Think of issues such as physician compensation or RVUs. There's a lot of patient treatment plans. Sometimes there's just not enough time, or it's not going to be possible to satisfy everyone. In those cases, it means a lot of delay. And that can be translated as a lack of conviction. We often hear this when individuals in an organization or even physicians compared to administrators, we look up the leadership ladder and we get really frustrated because they're not acting on this. Often what we fail to see is the fact that they're trying their best to work toward a win-win situation by collaborating. And it takes sometimes a painful amount of time and still may not always happen. So where does that leave us? When collaborating is appropriate, the goals and relationships are important to both parties. The problem is very important, and it requires on both parties a willingness to trust, to openly listen to alternative views and ideas, and to be flexible in the solution. Because often what results when we collaborate is not really exactly what either party wanted. So I would like to invite you one more time before we go to questions. As you think about what we just reviewed, these options, I'd love for you to put in the chat box a number on one of those up on the screen that says, which of these would you like to be better at using at the appropriate time? Which one may be most challenging, but you can see there would be a lot of value in you doing that. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. It would be really interesting and helpful to know where you would like to improve. That might help shape some of the direction of some of the future courses, since we'll be talking about this in the next couple of weeks. But I also just wanted to mention that we've got a little space here for some Q&A. And in addition to typing in one of these numbers, you're welcome either to unmute and ask a question or to type in a question in the chat box. And I'm happy to consider that in the next few minutes. So Sonia, Tahina, are we seeing any responses come into the chat box about response to this question?
A lot of 3s, 4s, 5s. Let me see. 3, 4, 3, 2, 4, and 1.
Okay.
3 and 4. Yeah, we're getting a lot of different answers. So
great. Well, that's
Mostly
good to
3s
know.
and 4s.
Great. We'll tally that up afterwards and we'll talk about that. But what it does illustrate again is usually what we really need and would love to be best at is typically the opposite or very different from our default style. When we realize we just need that flexibility. It's a great illustration of the takeaway from this session, that we have options. If we can get our head around what those options are, it really helps. And so as you think about conflict, especially if you have time and it's just not just thrown upon you in a surprise, use these 5 reference points to pre-plan. How might I use this effectively? When might this be most effective in this conversation? So I'm going to share this quote and then we can have some time for some Q&A. It's from a book that was published just a few years ago by an ex-FBI profiler called The Like Switch. And he says this: do not engage angry people because they're not thinking logically. During the fight or flight response, the body automatically responds to a threat. And he says it takes about 20 minutes to return to calm. He says during this time, they will not completely comprehend any explanation, solutions, or problem-solving options because they're not thinking.
Yes.
Yes.
We're almost done here.
Great. Okay. So
I'm
here's
sorry.
the advice.
Okay.
Allowing them time to calm down is a critical part of any anger management strategy. And then give them a measure of control over what happens next. It's great advice. And that really goes back to what we've said in the beginning about it's how I manage energy. The opportunity that I have is first to manage my own energy. And that empowers me to manage the energy of the other individual first by selecting a right approach. And then, as we'll talk about next week, about how I structure the conversation to avoid triggering the fight or flight response needlessly. So do you see any questions coming in the chat box yet, Sonia?
Yeah, I do actually. One from Aline Ade. Can
Yeah.
you give more information on the difference between 3, 4, and 5, since they all involve compromising?
Absolutely. On compromising, that's really a pretty emotion-free negotiation or minimal emotion. I'm not trying to satisfy everybody because I realize it's not going to be possible. When it comes to harmonizing, that's where I'm really willing to give up some of what I would like to see happen. I don't have a strong stake in it. And my position is, go ahead. Often, when it's a discussion about where are we going for dinner? Okay, we can argue that a long time if we want, but it's really easier if one person doesn't have strong feelings just to say, go ahead. That's a simple example, but we find it happens all the time in our day. That's just harmonizing. I can go along and get along, as we say. On the collaborating, it is usually a lot of work. And I really want to explore not only your positions, but how you feel about those positions in order to realize that when we leave, you've got a lot of buy-in, and I do too, because we have really worked toward a solution that we both have a lot of support for and energy for. And that's the main difference. So.
Okay, we have another question from Dr. Wasim. What is the secret to be calm when the time is limited and need to make a critical decision very quickly?
That's an excellent choice. At that particular point, especially as a physician, your options are limited, and you just have to choose this competing and make that choice. If it's not a choice you can make, if it's one that really involves the other party, then you're kind of stuck, and you have to make some time to de-escalate enough for reason to prevail. That's the goal. I'm just always trying to get to that threshold where we're not so upset that we can't be reasonable. That's just the flag you look for. That's a great question, though. It'd be nice if we had fewer times when we didn't have the pressure of a rapid decision and high emotions.
Right. I have a question.
Sure.
You said at the beginning, it's best to have these discussions with at least three people. But sometimes you find yourself, directly speaking to somebody, or, you're, in an office with them, and you can feel the tension. Like, so how do you deal with that kind of situation? What's the best thing to do in a situation like that?
That's really good, Tahina. Thank you. And it happens so often to us. In those moments, then my focus is entirely not on me, entirely on the other individual. And I am trying to imagine myself as a symphony conductor, changing the energy, helping that individual to de-escalate. That means I want them to be able to say what they need to say in this moment. I want them to feel like I'm listening well and not pushing back. So usually in those moments, I'm going to be silent, and my entire posture is I'm going to help them say whatever they need to say as calmly and completely as they say it, and let them know that I heard it. And that may be all the time we have for that moment, for that conversation. That's when we'll reschedule to re-engage in that. But until we allow that energy to dissipate, and that usually comes from them feeling like they have some power, even if it's just the power to express themselves, that they have been heard, even if it's just your quiet assent, not necessarily agreement. People don't really need to be agreed with always, but they do always need to be heard. And so that's really your goal. It's nothing but how can I help this person feel better in this moment? And it's a form of harmonizing, really. Is that helpful?
That's very helpful. And in fact, we're at the end of our
Great.
time together. So let's go to the next slide and just remind everybody that by tomorrow, go into EEDS and type in the code 24BLEB by noon tomorrow so that you get your your CME. And next slide, please.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us today, everybody, and taking your precious time out of the middle of your day. We hope this was helpful to you. If you want to leave a comment or how you enjoyed today's program, that would be really wonderful for us. And hope to see you in 2 weeks. Please sign up. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.